Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of Commentary on Culture. It's been a while. It's been a while since I made another episode. I think the last time I actually deleted the last episode that I was gonna make. So it was right after the fiasco in Afghanistan, and I was talking about, kind of how, every single level of the chain of command had failed the Marines of Kabul, and how the system was totally okay with just hanging them out to dry and, pretty much stomping on everybody that, had anything to say about it, right? Which that's, developed wonderfully. That's probably worth an episode in itself, in all honesty, but I don't know. We have better things to talk about today. So, right now is, it's quite an action-packed moment for the free world, so to speak. Following was it 11 days 11 days I think of trial. The Kyle Rittenhouse trial has concluded, and we are currently awaiting the jury's decision. And if you've been following this, I mean, the whole thing is just a mockery of what was supposed to be the justice system. It's ridiculous, from start to finish. I mean, like, the arguments themselves are just insane. And, like, the defense is frustrating, but the prosecution is just ridiculous. If you bring a gun, you lose the right to self-defense. And, if you, there were so many, they're, like, bullying the one guy over, them trying to make a statement change. And, there's so many illegal, unethical things and unethical things that they've done, over the course of the trial, from like attempted witness tampering to, trying to portray, the Fifth Amendment, as an admission of guilt, to, trying to sneak in, ultimately they're playing to win, right? So it's like, you hate them because they're not playing by the rules, but, why isn't our side playing by the rules? We have this old buffoon boomer who, doesn't understand what a pixel is, and is just going on. I mean, I guess you had to kind of watch it. It was pretty, it was like nails on a chalkboard, just watching, this old guy just sit there and just ramble on and just ask these ridiculous questions about, what a, what a pixel is, because, so anyways, the prosecution, and part of their devious game to try and, trip up old King Kyle here, brought out this enhanced photo, enhanced because it was a grainy security cam photo that they literally ran through a machine that cranked out, this pixelated image, pulled out this, very, fine image that seemed to show Kyle holding a rifle. And if you know anything about, any kind of image editing, or like, you've utilized social media, like pixels, from a picture that you take, a pixel on a digital camera is like the lowest you can go. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's it. You can't zoom in anymore. That's the minimum, that's the smallest block in the chain, so to speak, right? That's it. So the fact that's even admissible in court is just retarded. It's so dumb, like it's ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. And it's such a bad faith argument, that just defies, any kind of logic. But so here we are, after the defense squandered that, with a number of other things. I mean, they were just, unenergetic, and the prosecution, for all their ridiculous antics, was just like, out for blood, right? So, I mean, that's kind of where we're at. There's a lot of other trials going on right now. There's actually a lot to talk about. So, between the McMichael's trial down in Georgia, where they were, imprisoned for murder for some reason, when a black thug showed up to the neighborhood and tried to rob it, and they, at the behest of the police, investigated and then stopped it. And then also in Charlottesville, Virginia, the original ringleaders of the of the Charlottesville rally in 2017 that went nuts, they're on trial, which again is just hilarious. Like watching the notes from this, or like reading the notes from it, is just insane. Like the lawyers that showed up, these big swanky, no long-nosed lawyers showed up from New York City thinking that they were just going to steamroll these guys, and they absolutely didn't. They got their shit pushed in. But anyways, there's a lot of ramifications for all this stuff, so we're going to talk about it. So the biggest takeaway here. So, I mean, what's on trial right now, right? So we've already seen that, the mob has right of way. We saw that with the James Fields trial, so at the Charlottesville rally, James Fields was, one of the rally attendees who on his way out was, surrounded by a mob of Antifa, and they were, going to pull him out of his car and kill him. And he, accelerated through it, and this fat walrus, got squished in the process, right? And it turned out, into this big thing, and that was when, you really found out. I mean, that in my mind was, in my personal progression from, libertarian to wherever I am now, that was kind of the starting point where I really began to question everything, I really began to see, the media and social media, like big tech and, politicians, is acting all of kind of in the same tribe, so to speak. I really started to notice those uniform connections there, because that was really the first case where, it was clear to an objective observer that it wasn't this malicious murder, right? Which, if you look at the court case, they shoved it down that poor kid's throat, didn't give him a shot at all, packed the jury, denied him his public defender that, had a good case for him. Just ridiculous, insane. So the precedent from that, though, was that that the mob has right of way, right? That you cannot show up and meet the mob on equal terms and come out of it, in any kind of positive light, right? And this is looking to be an extension of it. The fact this wasn't just a 30-minute deliberation, where he was found innocent is absurd in itself. It's absurd that it was even brought to trial. The whole thing is just crazy. But this is just kind of a continuation of it in that light, because, where James Fields was, found to not be equal with the mob, Kyle Rittenhouse is not even allowed to resist the mob. Right? These clowns can start a riot in any town USA. Kenosha is not, I've been through Kenosha, and it's not a nice place, right? But it's nowhere. It's nowhere. It's some random Midwest town, like if there wasn't a sign for it, you'd have no idea where you were. That's just, and it's not bad, right? But, it just goes to show, because most people who are listening to this, most of us live in towns like this. They can come to our towns, shut them down, turn them into war zones. And not only is our local government going to abandon us, but if we resist the mob in any capacity, literally to a point where a child is being chased by pedophiles through the street, illegally armed wife beaters through the street, home rob, stuff like just insane. It's so insane, right? And you're not allowed to do that. It's even a debate. It's a debate, and even if they find him innocent, it doesn't matter, because the precedent has been set that, to any rational person, that's unacceptable. If you were to talk to someone on the street without any sort of, anything, kind of tying them to it, or anything kind of holding over their head or whatever, every rational person is going to sit there and tell you, yeah, if you have a mob of people coming after you, you have a right to self-defense, right? But, the reality is, and what we're seeing is that that's not the case, and this is an extreme case. It's an obscene case, right? Because, as like everybody likes to point out, Kyle is not an adult. King Kyle is not an adult. He was a child. He was a minor, and when it is an adult, there is no quarter given. Kyle, the only reason he's been given a quarter at all, or he's been shown any mercy by the state, is because his case is so ridiculously, it's just obscene. It's an obscene perversion of justice that it was even brought to trial. It was such a slam dunk for the defense, on so many different levels. But that ultimately it revolves around him being a minor, right? So, for people like you and I, that's not the case. When the mob came for, that one podcaster in Portland, and he pulled a gun, or Seattle, and he pulled a gun to defend himself. He was arrested by Seattle PD. Tim Pool talked about this in his little rant the other day. And, Seattle PD apologized to Antifa, and this, Seattle, right? It's a big city. But, the ramifications from it being Kenosha are that, if you live anywhere, a suburb of any major city, not even in the city itself, they can come and make war and on your street. And if you do anything to stop them, you will be arrested, thrown in jail, your name dragged through the media, called all kinds of names out of the sun. They're going to go after your family. They're going to go after your friends. They're going to go after your place of employment. They're not going to stop until they bully you out of existence, right? And, the positive thing to take away from this is that it's so radicalizing, because 50 years ago, this wasn't even a trial. When the Detroit race riots happened, they found black dudes with bullet holes in the back of their head, and the Detroit police didn't even ask questions. They have no idea who killed half those rioters, and they don't care. They didn't care. To this day, there's been some investigations into it, but there's been no arrests made. And that was the case, for many years before that, in the race riots in the 40s in Detroit, when, there's a number of black rioters that were killed. There was no investigation into it because the theory at the time was that, the state's job was to provide peace and justice in your neighborhood. And if for whatever reason they couldn't, you had an obligation to. You had an obligation to step up and do what your local government could not, right? Because the government was only the arm of the people. It was an extension of the people. And I think a lot of people have forgotten that. There's this idea that, we are separate from the government, and we're not. The state is a member of us. And that's how it was supposed to function. And so this is just a metric for how crazy things have gotten. So I don't know. So the next thing to talk about is why. Why is this a debate right now? And I'm sure to some extent, so you're looking at the jury, right? There's 7 women, 4 white men, and one person of color. So I can tell you right now, there is an argument between 8 of them against the 4 of them, and who knows how it's going. But 2 of them, right, have spoken up and said that, they're holding up their decision because they're citing backlash. Right, per the U.S. Marshal in Kenosha, according to Jack Posobiec, whatever, Poso, that, I'm not going to say that word, whatever, that weirdo. So they're worried about the media leaking their names and stuff. And, it's a valid concern. It's a valid concern. I mean, if they were worth a shit, they wouldn't care because they would recognize that the precedent that's being set directly impacts them, but that's what's there. And I mean, there's so many different things to talk about for this whole thing, it's, beyond, that it's an extension, it's a direct metric of the downfall of the country. It's an element of the further division of the right and left, of the just polarization in the United States, right? Because so many people are so charged about this for reasons that don't make sense. And of course, I mean on the left on that one, I mean you have to be an irrational person to sit there and look at this and say that, one, that you don't deserve to be in the same place that a riot or peaceful protest is happening, right? Like, if you're not part of that, you don't deserve to be there. That's absurd. That's absurd. That's crazy. Of course, you have a right to be outside when someone else is protesting. Just because someone else is exercising their First Amendment rights does not mean that you don't have the option to exercise yours. That's ridiculous. The idea that, you don't have the right to be armed, and go to someone else's town to try and help them out when their, civil services are overwhelmed. Well, this is like when we get hit by hurricanes, what do you think happens? People show up from all over the country to help out when the local government has been overwhelmed. Why would it not be the case in a time of unrest? Why was a child out there? Well, because all the adults, have figured out that, all the adults looked at this and were like, you know what? I'll just let that burn down because I'm going to go to jail. And Kyle, because he didn't have a dad to sit there and tell him, not to get involved and to just, let the system collapse on its own, decided to go out and try and prop it up, because That's what people did for decades, for centuries, when it was still their system. And he didn't get the memo. He didn't get the memo when it was, until it was too late, right? I'm sure, he wishes that he didn't do that. I'm sure he wishes that he wasn't even exposed to it, because I mean the price his family has had to pay is just ridiculous, right? But so from that argument, right, we get the well, he was a minor with a rifle, and they're not allowed to do that, which the judge thankfully dismissed. That that he wasn't supposed to, he came to an armed riot, there to confront people. And it's like, okay, even then, he's a willing combatant. So are the jackasses who attacked him. Okay, so if we're going to, there is literally, I believe I talked about it on the last podcast that I did. I believe it was in Wisconsin as well. There was a judge or a prosecutor who refused to charge a man who shot up a car full of other young black teenagers and killed a couple of them, if I remember correctly, because they were both willing combatants. So it's like the precedent's already been set. So if he's a willing combatant and they're a willing combatant, just, okay, well, if we're already going to do that for inner city blacks, why not? Why don't we just, follow through? And obviously, the reason that they can't, the reason that all of this, illogical stuff is happening is because it's not our system of government, because it's not our state, it's not our community. We have been completely subverted and supplanted. These people have come in from overseas, and even here at home, they've corrupted our youth to thinking that we have to, this perversion of Christianity that is, this selfless giving or whatever that's been, perverted by atheism. We have to give away what we have, and live in a third world shithole, so that way we have something real to complain about, that concept of white privilege. And, this is the ultimate end of it, is that, you're not allowed to go to, some place where, Kyle literally knew the owners of this car dealership that he was at, shows up and tries to protect it, and, isn't even, I don't know, causing any problems, just there, just there and not part of the riot, right? And I mean, I don't know. Well, why is he out there doing that? Why isn't it the police's job? The trial should have been thrown out when the police didn't arrest him at the time, when they didn't accept his surrender. That should have been the moment that everybody realized that, you know what? I mean, if the police are not going to arrest this guy for shooting someone the moment it happened, then why bother prosecuting it? Why bother touching it? Like if they're that overwhelmed, if the state cannot, even intervene for justice, they don't have a right to distribute it. If the government cannot, and that's the precedent that was used in the 60s during the race riots. If the state could not protect your business and you executed a looter, they weren't going to hold you accountable, as if you executed some random person, because it was an extreme circumstance and they could not, facilitate the needs of their people, right? So, I mean, the whole thing is just so absurd and insane. It's just wild. It's so wild watching all this stuff, because the reality is you can't even argue with these people. They have a primordial hatred of this kid because he represents white resistance, to a mob that literally wants to wipe us out. It was a black race riot over a man who had, a knife in his hand, who was, going to stab somebody and was shot by a police officer. It's literally, the foundation of law and order right there. I mean, it's cut and dry, like you can sit here and argue semantics all day long. At the end of the day, that guy was out to commit evil and he was stopped, and nobody has argued that. It's all just these semantics of, well, what if, what if he was this, what if he was that, what if it didn't go down like that? How do you know? What did they know at the time? And it's like, it doesn't matter what they knew at the time. It doesn't matter what they anticipated. What matters is that he was a bad motherfucker who was out to do bad things and was stopped, right? And so they had a race riot over it. And they were terrorizing these poor people. If I had the option, I still haven't really figured out how to, do a webcam kind of like video podcast where it like screen records and stuff, because I'm really not that computer savvy at this stuff. At this stuff in particular. we could pull up videos of mobs roaming through the neighborhoods of Kenosha and being repelled by people who were shooting at them because they were showing up to people's houses, kicking in doors, breaking windows, and threatening them, and a number of them hid and cowered in fear, and that stopped the day after old King Kyle put, a round through a pedophile, a round through a wife beater, and then a round through, the bicep of, this Jewish thug who, was up to no good. Again, up to no good, right? He was, wearing a paramedic thing, helping rioters destroy this town, illegally carrying. I mean, there's so many aspects to this case where it's like, it's just ludicrous. It's so ludicrous. Like, they're sitting there saying that this kid doesn't have the right to own, to possess this rifle. But this thug illegally carrying a handgun does. Like there's no line of logic to it. You can't rectify it with logic, right? And that's because they've already passed the threshold where they're arguing in good faith. They don't want to be on our team. They want to destroy us. They see us as a relic of the past that, the momentum is behind them, and they actively rejoice in the reality that we are a minority in our own country, but we are going to continue to lose influence, right? They're excited that, Kyle is on trial right now because it's a step in their direction. So even if he's found innocent on all charges, which I think becomes less and less likely by the day or by the hour, obviously the jury's gone home, but, every hour that they spend, going over this, is an hour that they're not spending being rational. They're trying to protect themselves from what's inevitable. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree with the logic there, because it's like the state obviously doesn't care. The Kenosha court system is not going to protect them. There's so many bad actors, that it would take a literal genocide to flush out. It would take a war to flush out, and there's no way to do it without that, because this doesn't happen peacefully. Because these people have enough momentum, they're organized enough to where there's nothing that we can do. So, well, that's not true. There's plenty of stuff that we can do, but, there's nothing that we can do to change their minds. We can't, the only way we can convince them is through force of arms and dominance, right? And that's what kept them in check for so long, right? And that's what we've really been missing. So, and it kind of starts at the personal level, right? It starts at, inside, with how you view the world. And then from there, it goes out to your family, to your friends, to your local community, and then it extends from there. And until we kind of, the problem is that, there's just not enough of the lifeblood left in the nation, to facilitate that. And that's what's happening in these places like Kenosha, Wisconsin. It's a majority black town now. It wasn't, only a few years ago. It's still voted red mostly, but that doesn't mean anything anymore. So the question now is, what do we do about this? How do we look at it? How do we go forward? How do we move forward? Because it is, debilitating. I mean, regardless of if they find them innocent or not, they had to think about it, which, it's kind of like one of those questions that you ask somebody that, if they hesitate, you already know the answer. Oh, do you love me? And they have to think about it. Well, yeah, and that's exactly what's happening right here. And so going forward, we have to approach these things as though we are being hunted by the state, as though we are being targeted, because we are, like if you, and that's kind of, I guess, what else I wanted to talk about here. With the McMichael's case going on, that's directly connected to this. The same way that the James Fields case was directly connected to this, in the Charlottesville riot. So the McMichaels were living in, I think I've already talked about this, but, just to kind of go back over it, so it's this ex-cop and his son, that live in this rural Georgia town that is so, it's so poor that they have a string of break-ins in their neighborhood, and after retiring, the elder McMichael is asked by the police department to, investigate, basically, right, to keep an eye out for this bad character. And, so they do. And then, one day they, sure enough, they catch, so if you don't live in a small town, which I think most of the people listening to this do. But, you kind of get the vibe for how things go after, these guys had lived there for 30, 40 years or whatever, like they had been there for a long time, and in tiny towns like that, tiny, poor towns like that, when someone goes running down the street that you don't know, there's a reason, and so, basically, yeah, they had seen this guy before. They knew who he was. They recognized him. They recognized that, the last time they saw him that, he had went to pull a gun or something. So they had, just cause, to think that he was armed. And the police asked them to investigate. So, that's kind of the crux of the case, in my opinion, so it's not just some random dude going to some random neighborhood. This is their neighborhood. This is their house. This is kind of like that white guy down in that army sergeant down in South Carolina who, it was his neighborhood, it was his houses, and there was some thug out causing problems, and he went out like men are supposed to and solved the problem. And that's exactly what the McMichaels did. They saw this clown running by, in freaking Timberland work boots, and something else. It was ridiculous. It was like cargo pants or something. He was like 20 miles away from his house, right? Which is totally what I wear. Every time that I've ever run a marathon, I wore, combat boots and freaking, khaki pants, right? Just dumb, just so fucking dumb. So anyways, they catch this animal, right? Going through somebody's house. He had just gotten done going through somebody's house, right? Hauling ass away. And sure enough, they knew something was up, right? And so they pull up to him, in their truck, and they're like, "Hey, we want to talk." Doesn't talk, doesn't stop, Man, you could sit there and you can say, "Oh, there's a black guy in a white town and racism and this, that, and the other," but the reality is that, everybody knows the game here. It's kind of like after the OJ case. Everybody kind of knew the game there. Oh, it's racism. No, it's not. That guy killed his wife. And the jury found him innocent because he was black. Okay, oh, more racism. Okay, well, isn't it interesting that, you have to do something in order for it to be, in order for racism to be exhibited? Like if it was racist and it was like aggressive and it was bad, you would associate it with, these white clowns going to this black neighborhood and roughing somebody up for being outside in a black neighborhood, which has never happened, which has literally never happened, in American history, with the exception of the Tulsa race riot and a couple other race riots, which again were caused by black dudes going out and causing problems. And, and in the case of the Tulsa race riot, they killed like 10 people. They showed up and they murdered like 10 white people at this freaking courthouse, waiting for the jury to, come into order or whatever so that this guy could be adjudicated. And so people got pissed off and burned down the black side of town, right? So, and they said that, hundreds of people were killed in that. You know what? I'll roll with that. Let's roll with that. Let's roll with their narrative on that one. Yeah, white men got mad and murdered hundreds of them. So, and it wasn't even murder. They just, exterminated them. So, anyways, so, this guy is running through this neighborhood. They pull up, they try to stop him, and, he fights. And the video is so clearly, it reveals, so the defense for the McMichaels released the video. That's how damning it is for the narrative. He wasn't just a jogger that they walked up and popped in the back of the head with a 12-gauge shotgun. They tried to stop him and talk to him, and he ran up and tried to grab their rifle. He tried to grab their shotgun, right? So, and that's literally all caught on video. He's running around trying to grab hold of this shotgun, and what he's going to do when he gets a hold of it. No one's that retarded to sit there and think that, he's going to, just throw it away and run away. Give me a break, That's insane. That's ridiculous. So, the gun goes off, right? And it's honestly, the only part that I think is, should be revealed in court, is whether or not the gun went off because, old jogger Ahmed Aubrey pulled it, towards him, right, which, caused the younger McMichael's finger to rest on the trigger and pull the trigger, or if, the younger McMichael, knew he was losing control of his weapon and discharged it, right? So anyways, he gets shot, I believe just once, I'd have to go back and watch the video. I believe the shot that killed him was the one that he possibly let off himself. So, anyways, he gets an abdomen full of double-aught buckshot, right? Which goes exactly how you think it's going to go. Guy stumbles, falls, and dies. And initially they didn't charge the McMichaels, right? And they shouldn't have. And the only reason that it gained any traction was because some black civil rights lawyer got involved. And there's just a number of other things that happened. And this actually directly led to a number of anti-white violence cases. There was a guy in Delaware who went and shot up, a white couple in a cemetery because, directly because of this, right? Because the narrative was so blown out of proportion. And so it's kind of the same thing, right? So in Kyle Rittenhouse's case, they were pursuing this kid, through the streets trying to kill him. And in the McMichael's case, they're trying to stop and talk to this guy, and figure out why he's in their neighborhood because he's clearly up to no good. And sure enough, he fights him and gets shot, So in both cases, we have, people like us that are ultimately like us that, are simply trying to live peacefully in their own neighborhood. And what happens? They're under attack, they're under siege by, these thugs and criminals. And when they fight back, the state comes down on them. And how many, police officers were shot last year, even before the riots that, nobody was found. There's a number of them, right? And no one knows who shot them, though, or even if they were arrested, didn't make the news. It was just another cop who got shot, right? But Derek Chauvin was still imprisoned. Everybody knows who he is because, there was a video of him, restraining George Floyd, which is another just absurd case. The defense literally proved that he didn't die by suffocation. Because his oxygen levels were too high, right? But the jury was, is led by black nationalists and people who had lived under siege for the last, year. So how do you think they were going to vote, right? Or how do you think they were going to decide? And I don't know. So the end result of this, right, is that we get to live in neighborhoods that are under attack, right? And the common denominator with all of these things, whether it's James Fields, Derek Chauvin, Kyle Rittenhouse, the McMichaels, Sergeant, what's his face down in South Carolina. There's a couple other ones too. I can't remember. I don't have any notes up right now. I'm doing all this off memory. All these people, they all have one thing in common, and that's they cooperated with law enforcement. And if the state is not going to protect your neighborhood, if they're not going to protect your neighborhood, and they're going to arrest you when you protect your neighborhood, let's think about this. Let's stop for a moment before we continue and let's think about this here. We're not saying that, this clown is, going out, on people that he think robbed something and just shooting them, right? Kyle Rittenhouse isn't going out to a mob and just shooting into the mob, right? James Fields didn't just show up to the rally to run over Antifa, right? Derek Chauvin didn't show up, to just kill a black guy, right? They're not out for blood. They're not out, in an offensive manner, Instead, they're often provoked and attacked, and they respond, right? So moving on from there, right? So basically, the state is not going to protect you. It's not going to protect your home or your neighborhood. You don't get to live in peace. When you call 911, they don't have to answer. And when you do, when you step up to the plate and you make it so that your kids can go outside and enjoy the neighborhood like you did, like when you were younger, right? When you go outside, and try to limit the amount of damage, in this post-apocalyptic freaking war zone, right? When you show up and you have something to say and you try to protest the mob that's been, besieging, right-wing events for the last, however many months up to that point, since Donald Trump had, said that he was going to run for president and Antifa, was born. When they won't protect you and you step up to the plate to do that, they come down on you, right? So the way to take this and the way to move forward with this is to realize that they're not going to protect you, that they're not your friend, that even though they look like you and they walk like you and they talk like you, they are so happy to side with Antifa and to side with BLM and to side with these black nationalists and these thugs and these communist pedophiles and throw you under the bus because, on one hand, they're weak, right? They're weak. instead of leaving when the vax mandates came out, from now on, they chose their paycheck, right? So that tells you the caliber of individual there, but even before then, right? And to give them a little bit of credit, they've been under siege for years. Literally law enforcement has been under siege by communists in this country since, the civil rights era, and before. And that was, a huge topic for a long time, the Rodney King riots. That applied, that set a precedent across the country, and that same thing, right? These cops go out, they arrest this guy who violently resists them. I believe he pulled a weapon on him, and they beat the ever-loving shit out of him because he was a thug out being violent. And, the state came down on them, right? They said, whoa, 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 because of rioters, they bent to the will of the rioters. Right? So we've been living under mob rule now for a while, right? It was just, only these crackpots that were, they were ostracized from society, had any chance of verbalizing it, right? Everyone else, it's like, well, we're not in camps yet, right? So, in order to stay within the social hierarchy, you kind of had to, pretend that things weren't as bad as they are. And now it's kind of a unique turning point, right? Because, we are at a point where, the majority of young men have been ostracized by society. We've been ejected from society. It's not my community anymore. I can't go down to the social, services building and get free money just for existing, and it's a smaller, and not that I want to, right? But just to show, that it's now, there's medical practices, right, that are are only restricted for Black and Hispanics in this country, in Texas of all places, right? So that's already there. When I apply for a job, I have to make sure when I apply, I beat out every other white man. Right. And when Black men are hired into the jobs that I do, they don't. They're of a much lower quality because they don't have to compete because there's so fewer of them that can compete on my level. Right. So we're from the diversity quotient standpoint. Right. It's harder and harder for me to exist in the world. Right. And it's easier and easier for everybody else. And this is kind of the same thing, right? So that's why it's so popular now. And going forward, we have to approach it from that standpoint, right? When the mob comes, so the mob violence aspect of this has been working beautifully. We are so atomized and we are so dependent on the system. We have to have Amazon and we have to have global trade and we have to have these rich international bankers sit there and subsidize everything, right? Because otherwise nobody makes any money because we don't make our own stuff. Our economy isn't homegrown anymore. That we are literally enslaved to people who are using the riots as a behavioral changing tool, right? It's a behavioral modification technique. So it's going to continue. It's not going anywhere. Why would it? It's worked beautifully, and the only time it didn't is when Kyle Rittenhouse, shot 3 rioters and killed 2 of them. And then the riot stopped the next day, right? So, going forward, we have to have the same amount of determination, right? We deserve to live here. We deserve to live free. We deserve to live, not in fear. And, when the state comes to come down on us, we're not their friend. They're not our buddy. The cops that, they sit there and they say, oh, I was a Marine too. I was a soldier too. I was in the paratroopers. I was in the 82nd Airborne. I did this, that, and the other. Well, I'm just like you. I was security forces in the Air Force. Well, I did this. That's my dad. My dad did this. Blah blah blah. They're not like us. They're not like us. They're not like us at all. They don't have the same risk holding over their head. And in fact, they're incentivized to work with these thugs. Because even though they will still get the ditch, even though they will still be ejected, even though they'll still lose their job, their livelihood, be thrown in jail, whatever, they still, right, are, that's my dog, sorry. The mob is still going to come for them in the end. And I mean, it's such a, it's a drowning man's mentality, right? They are, under the, the mistaken belief that they can, side with these animals and that they'll be restrained, or they'll be, kind of let to live, and they will right up until the end, once they've outlived their usefulness. So, with that in mind, right, you can't work with, you can't say anything. You can't say anything. And, a number of my friends that, have gotten into these altercations, they kind of approach it from this, the manliness that they were raised with, the masculinity they were raised with, where they showed up and they were like, what, this is what I did. I'm going to be honest about it. And you can't do that anymore. I mean, if you're not going to be dishonest, you have to, for one, you shouldn't be taking away from the community around you. So, you should never be in a position where, someone is interrogating you for taking away from the community, right? And if you're defending your community, they're your enemy. They're not your friend. So don't work with them. Don't talk to them. Don't give them anything. When there is unrest, when there is, mass rioting and stuff, work with your community, your local community, right? Where are your neighbors at? Make sure that you have, friends on your street that you can trust, that you can, kind of work with, to make sure that you're living safely, right? And that's kind of, the limit that you can do. It's really not much more, because they're going to turn on you the moment that the pressure turns on, right? But you got to get in front of it as much as possible, right? So talk to them beforehand. No videos, no social media. Don't talk about it. If law enforcement comes and asks, don't say anything, and be ready to, encounter resistance, because a lot of people are just barely figuring this out. We're a long way from any kind of mass civil unrest, mass civil disobedience against this, parasitic system. So, until we get to that point, right, we're going to have to, be very, very careful how we go about business, right? And slowly start to work out, ideally it would be best if we could, if we could come together and find people who are of like mind and kind of move close to each other so that we're within an arm's reach, so that we don't even have to, convert our neighbors to our cause, like we don't have to sit there and wonder if, if they're just going to say yes enough to, get me to stop pestering them to buy a rifle, and then leave me out to dry, the moment I have to use mine, right? Find like-minded people ultimately and kind of move towards them, and then just kind of work back from there, work with what you can. And ultimately your connection to the community only extends as much as their connection to you. That's kind of one of our core tenet beliefs, and what should be our core tenet beliefs, is that the people around us have to give back to us as much as we give to them. So if they're not going to take care of us, if they're not going to take care of our families if we get arrested, if they're not going to, help watch us, work night shifts and stuff, if we have to live in a neighborhood that's under siege, that's dealing with riots or, huge crime increases and stuff, then they don't get to reap the benefits of that, and that's just it. That's the limit of what we can do. So, to kind of wrap this up, we have kind of given some updates on the Kyle Rittenhouse case. We kind of went over some similar cases that set similar precedents. And ultimately, I hope he's found innocent. I think it would be most beneficial to us as a community if he was found guilty. I think that would wake a lot of people up. But on a personal level, I don't want to see anybody innocent go to prison. I don't think he's guilty. I mean, if it was my court, I wouldn't have even. I would have disallowed. I would have found every way I could to disallow it. I mean, and that's kind of the dedication that we need going forward. Is that we need to fight, tooth and nail, inch by inch, and not let these people, whatever you want to call them, if you don't want to call them people, because honestly, they're not really deserving of the title person. And we're gonna, find a way to win. We're going to find a way to protect our own. We're going to find a way to keep going forward, and I don't know that we'll take back our nation, but, get set up for, a nucleus set up for what comes after and what comes next. So anyways, I don't know. In other news, don't take the shot. If you do, if you get it now, you're a pussy. That's all I have to say about that. If you waited until they twisted your arm, then you're literally getting it not because you thought it was a good idea, but because you're attached to these creature comforts and you deserve, like if you didn't get it because you didn't think it was healthy, then you deserve the side effects of it because you bitched out. When push came to shove, you didn't really actually believe in what you said you believed in. So, I don't know. That's all I think about that. I mean, I just think it's ridiculous. I talk to people all the time at work. They're like, "Oh, I'll get it if they make me." And I'm just like, then why don't you just get it? They're like, well, what if they don't make me? And then it's like, but what if they do? What if they do and then you get a side effect and then you die? Like, if that's what you're worried about, like, then like, they're not going to pay for anything. They don't owe you anything. They work that into all their freaking regulations. It's a federal mandate. They don't owe you shit. They're not going to pay for your medical care. They're not going to give you any handouts, right? So I don't know. Let's see, what else? Reading list. Let's see. The Metaphysics of War should have been something that was required reading in grade school. If you're bored and you're not reading anything, you need to read that. That's going to be, if I do get it back into doing regular podcasts, I think I'll kind of shift away from religion to that, because I think there's a lot of good stuff in that one. Kind of talking about, the necessity of, focusing on yourself, and not just, I mean, obviously, yeah, focusing on yourself, but, that's the changes that we want to see in the world start here, right? And, that starts with, your ability to, kind of adopt the right mindset and demand it of yourself, when you don't want to and stuff like that. So, other than that, not much. I mean, there's actually been a ton of stuff going on. A lot of it's very personal. It's not stuff that I really want to put out on the internet, so kind of keep it a little close. Otherwise, I mean, I guess we'll just kind of keep watching and hoping that, old King Kyle, I think that's what I'm going to call this. A commentary on culture, old King Kyle or something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, hopefully they find him innocent. I guess we'll see. I have a feeling that at the very least, they're going to find him guilty of a lesser charge, which is still bullshit. It's such bullshit. I have a feeling that they are going to find the Charlottesville guys guilty. The McMichaels are toast, which is so frustrating because they're so clearly innocent. And any lawyer worth their shit. That's the part that kills me. Is it's like, where are the lawyers? Like, why is it so hard to explain you have a right to live in a peaceful neighborhood? Do you have any idea how many people that wins over on a normal day? Like, you just talk to someone, on the street. Hey, do you have a right to live in a peaceful neighborhood? Yeah, well, yeah. What would you do if you lived under siege in your peaceful neighborhood? Well, I'd probably stop it. Like, it's so mundane. It's not even like an extremist viewpoint. Like, hey, you have the right. You paid for this house. You have the right to live in peace. You have the right to live, without fear, of going outside, and even if, you want to argue that, well, you can't, affect anybody else's decisions, blah, 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 you have the right to change it. You have the right to change it when it's not good enough, when it's not safe enough, when it's not up to your standards. You have the right to improve the world around you, and if that means taking out the riffraff from your neighborhood and not letting thugs steal from your neighbors and, not letting the mob show up and intimidate you and burn down your house and rape your family, I mean, then, what? That's what must be done. Because ultimately, I mean, we have to choose between accepting this ridiculous system or, fighting back against it. So, and in that way, that's kind of what I was talking about. We just kind of have to adopt this insurgent mindset, that, for one, we need to constantly work with, constantly, we need to constantly work to, build up our own relationships and, kind of push the message out there that, this shit's ridiculous and we don't have to take it, at a local level. We can just work together as a team and just not rely on the system that clearly wants to annihilate us. And, from there, I mean, we'll build up, slowly over time. It's a constant, very slow process. And, in a lot of ways, we're not going to make any progress until the enemy makes progress, right? So the goal is not to win. It's just to blunt the blow. to keep our clan safe, right? To keep our team safe. Let the wave roll over everybody else, right? Radicalize them, and then we'll scoop them up, and incorporate them into the team when they're ready, right? Because especially these older people, they live under the guise that they're going to vote their way out, and it's just like, you're not going to do that. You're not going to do that. Oh, well, Constitution this. Well, the Constitution was only worth, its salt when, the country was made up of the people who wrote the Constitution. It's not. It's not anymore. We're a minority, So, from the get-go, that's not possible, right? So until those, and they are slowly, until those people lose faith in the system and lose faith in the government's ability to answer their problems and to solve their issues, then they're not going to be willing to converse about it, right? And the only people that are the people who have been locked out of the system, that can see it, its rotten interior from the ground up, and know that it's only a matter of time before it collapses. So that's kind of just the direction that we have to move. So, in other news, let's see. So let's talk about some positive stuff here. No, not a whole lot of positive stuff. So, oh well, I think that's enough for now. I think I've gotten my thoughts out. So I hope you enjoyed. Please send me a message. Let me know what you think. I appreciate. I only did this. I only talked about this and made another podcast because one of you guys reached out and said that you really liked him and that you wish I would make more. So there's been a couple of you that have brought that up, but so that was actually kind of cool. That kind of kept me going. So. Anyways, yeah, I think that's about it. So that's about all I have. So stay safe. Have a good night. God bless Kyle Rittenhouse, and victory is ours one of these days. Slowly. Peace.